And welcome back to the Bitcoin Business Bureau. I'm your host, as always, LitecoinLeader. Today, we're talking on a very special day in history. If you don't know what it is, it's December 7th, and we'll talk about what this happened exactly 80 years ago today and why that's relevant to today's discussion. And today's discussion is talking about tipping points. Now, tipping points are places where it's a book. It was actually a good book that was written by, I believe it was Malcolm Gladwell. And it's just checking that. Yes, I'm going to be mentioning 3 books today. 3 books. It's Christmas time, holiday season. These are books you might want to put on your list or might want to consider getting from the library. I'm sure they're all in the library, but one of them is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And what exactly is a tipping point? Well, if you remember the old days on the playground, you had a seesaw or teeter-totter, as it will, and you had things that were basically balanced, and you had things that was, just the old lever and a pivot point, and things go up and down on that pivot point. And there's a point at which things will tip one way or the other. That is called the tipping point. Now, why is that relevant today, and why is it relevant in history? Well, tipping points are typically events that push history towards one event or another. Now, back in 1941, on this date in history, it was December 7th, 1941. That today is, for those who don't know, Pearl Harbor Day. That was the day where the U.S. was pushed into World War II. And that was the tipping point for the U.S. getting involved into the World War II. Well, but at that point, they were out of it. And that got them in it. So the Pearl Harbor was the tipping point for the U.S. involvement into World War II. Well, the powers that be certainly like their dates. And today is 80 years later. And that's going to bring me to the second book I'm going to mention today, which is The Fourth Turning. And The Fourth Turning was written by William Strauss. And I've read some or all of these books, but I know the concepts behind them. That's why I can recommend them. The Fourth Turning it's another history lesson. It's basically saying that a generation is roughly 20 years, give or take. Of like when they mature. So, and every fourth turning or every fourth generation, every group of 20 years is classified by certain styles of people. And every fourth turning, there tends to be a revolution of sorts. So, or a large event. So 80 years ago was World War II. Now we're 80 years again, and now we could be at another tipping point. 80 years prior to 1941 was 1861. That was the first year of the Civil War. 80 years before that was 1781. That's basically starting our country at the end of the American Revolution, 1776. So about 80 years lines up pretty well with the idea, the concept of behind a fourth turning. So, so those are the 2 books I wanted to mention today. I'll mention a third a little bit later, but getting back to a tipping point, there are events in time that some of them are very clearly delineated. Like, okay, this is a big event. Things are happening here. Like whatever you believe in the history, whether it's accuracy or not, but the day we walked to the moon was considered a tipping point in our technology. The day the transistor was invented was not really a tipping point, but it clearly was because of the technological advances that happened beyond that. So there are some things that are like Pearl Harbor Day was a clear tipping point because it was a dramatic event that happened to the entire country. The president came on and talked about it, the day that will live in infamy, and it launched us into the war. So that was a clear tipping point. Another tipping point in 1971 when we went off the gold standard. It was a tipping point, but it wasn't as dramatic for people that said like, oh, we aren't going to war. Like 1941, Pearl Harbor Day was a huge event across the country. We understood we're heading to war. Now we're heading to the point where we other events may not be as clear, but they can still be viewed as tipping points. Why am I talking about tipping points? Well, I'm going to bring this to crypto, and we're going to bring this to the world of finance. This is a topic that I was researching a lot yesterday and catching up off of the weekend, which is the Evergrande situation. Now, Evergrande, people are thinking that this is going to ripple into the crypto space. No pun intended by mentioning Ripple there, but it's going to trickle into the crypto space because of the impact that it could have to, say, Tether. That's really not the big significance. What it really is the entire economy. So what's happening right now is that the government involved with, I have to watch what countries I mentioned, thank you, YouTube, but this particular Asian country, it's a different Asian country than what led to a Pearl Harbor Day. That was Japan bombing Pearl Harbor, and we're allowed to say that on Pearl Harbor Day, I'm sure. But this is a different Asian country that's involved with Evergrande. Now, Evergrande, they have, as you've probably heard from that particular country, they have ghost cities. If you don't know what I'm talking about, easy Google, you can find the ghost city images for this particular very large, very inhabited Asian country. But the real estate is an imminent collapse. The real estate market is an imminent collapse, as well as the bond market, thanks to the Evergrande situation. Evergrande, for those who don't know, they are a real estate developer in that particular country, and they happen to miss, sorry, just turning down my phone. I'm going off like crazy again. So they missed a payment on their interest, and they are essentially what's called a zombie company, which is a zombie company is like they only have enough money to cover their payments. They're not profitable. They're not really contributing to the overall economy. They're basically stuck. They're in limbo. They're just walking dead company. That's a zombie company. So now we've gone past the zombie point where they can't even make their interest payments, and now they're like the government for that country and for the associated with Evergrande has seized some of their assets and are now liquidating them to try to resolve this. But it's a big issue because real estate is the #1 investment vehicle for most of the populace in that country. So and the price of Evergrande and the bond prices and the stock markets associated with Evergrande, really the price is plummeting. So this is going to have this is probably going to be the tipping point for the world economy, because there's so much money owed in debt to this particular country. And now if this country is starting to go into like nationalists and just bunkering down and trying to cover their assets as best as they can, this is going to have an impact to the rest of the globe, and other financial markets may be impacted, which will impact both investment markets, like it's the stock exchanges, and also real estate markets, because they use bonds which back mortgages. All this is going to contribute together, and it'll look like it'll just sort of be happening overnight, but it's not. This is the final tipping point where like when we have companies being large companies, imagine this is going to make Lehman Brothers look like a small drip. Like imagine that the U.S. government had to take over the stock exchange, or they had to take over the like Bank of America, or all the national banks, or the largest real estate development company in the United States. That's basically where we're at, but even larger for this particular Asian country. That's going to impact all the global financial markets, which are going to cause all the prices to start to come down in real estate and mortgages and investments everywhere. So what that means is that everyone's going to be, we've had a bull run for the stock market for years now, and now we're at a point where we may be reaching the crest and a tipping point to where we start to come downwards from those prices. And as prices of everything start to come down, they're going to be looking for safe havens for their wealth. This is where crypto comes in. So the crypto, again, Bitcoin and other assets like it, they're not making more than there's a limited supply. So look for governments to try to support their current economies and whatever they can. They'll get more nationalistic, less global. They'll try to close their borders a little bit more, which has been already happening a lot in the last couple of years. But now it's going to get even more involved. This is just my opinion. This is not financial advice. This is just what I'm piecing together from what I'm hearing from various influencers around the YouTube space, articles I'm seeing, piecing a lot of different things together. And if that happens, that we're going to see more hyperinflation, more money printing across Europe, across the US, everywhere. And there are people that will be seeing that their values aren't being held up in these other markets. They're going to be looking for a safe haven or market to get into. That's where Bitcoin and other coins like it, or all the entire crypto market, are going to see a mass adoption. This is going to be the tipping points for global adoption. We've been talking about, when are we going to get mass adoption? When are we getting enough people involved in this? When are people going to start getting involved? Well, everybody seems to know what the symbol means, and they understand that Bitcoin is here to stay. So that is basically that is the #1 brand for all crypto. So look for a lot more investments to come into that space now. Some would argue that this recent sell-off and dropping the price into the 40s again, and now it's trickling back up, was an opportunity for people to get in again, and it often leads to another bull run. So this could be the tipping point where we are getting from the innovators and the early adopters to the mass adoption. And that gets me to my third book for your Christmas list. It's a book called Crossing the Chasm, or Chasm, however you pronounce it. I say Chasm. And that is written by Jeffrey Moore, Jeffrey with a G. That must be English or whatever. But Crossing the Chasm is the book. And I'll try to remember to put all these books in my my description later on. But what that shows, it shows a nice bell curve on the cover, and you'll see that it's in 5 distinct parts. There's the very beginning part, which is the first couple percent. These are the innovators, and then you have the early adopters, and then you have the mass adoption, and you have the late adoption, and then you have the laggards. But we're worried about getting from the tipping point is getting from the first two groups, which make up about between 10 and 15%. Typically, the number is about 12% of innovators and early adopters. That's where most of you are who are in crypto space now. How do we get to mass adoption? We have to get to mass adoption. That's the next big group, which on the cover is blue. I'm going to share the book, the picture, because it's going to be easier for me to talk about. There we go. So we have the early adopters, which is the light blue area here. Then you have the innovators. This is the chasm, getting to how do you get to mainstream customers. That's the blue group. That is your early mass adoption. Then you have the late mass adoption, and then you have the laggards. There are other names for it, but that's just the basic concept. The first two groups are the first one. Like the blue people were like, that was your original OGs of cryptocurrency, or basically anything else. There are like first couple of years involved. Green is where you're at. That's where we are. And we're trying to cross this chasm to the mass adoption. And I think this is the tipping point across the chasm to mass adoption. That's where we are, because we're going to see an exodus, not referring to the wallet, but or the book of the Bible. I'm just saying an action. I'm going to see people running away from traditional markets to try to find these safe havens for their wealth. And we've talked about it on this channel many times. You have precious metals, which is a controlled market right now and a manipulated market, at least for now, and cryptocurrency, which is a little bit manipulated, but not entirely, certainly less manipulated than silver or gold or other things like that. So we're going to be crossing the chasm now into mass adoption because of this economic collapse that we're going to see over in Asia. That's going to spread across the globe. That's going to impact bond markets, derivatives, real estate, mortgage-backed securities. All this stuff is going to have issues, and the governments are not going to know how to deal with all this at once. So people are going to notice this and say, hey, my Tesla stock is going down. My FANG stocks are going down. All this stuff is going down. Where can I take my wealth and store it safely? Welcome to Bitcoin. Welcome to cryptocurrency. So that's where we are. We're at the tipping point. And to bring this full circle, 80 years ago today, we had a tipping point that was announced by the president. It said, it's a day that will live in infamy. We are heading into World War II, and we know what happened for the next 4 years, that we are just involved in that war. And it was an economic turmoil and a personal turmoil and like social turmoil. All this stuff happened, major event for 4 years. This could be another several year event, but there's not going to be a particular announcement on the media, by anyone in particular. You have to hunt for videos like this to tell you this could very well be a tipping point where we're going from, we're crossing the chasm, we're tipping a point, and we're doing that fourth turning. We are now moving into mass adoption, where people aren't just seeking out Bitcoin or learning about it. They need it now. They need to get out of the other markets because they're about to collapse, and they're going to have major issues that are happening because of situations like Evergrande. So that's why Evergrande is important now. It's a little hard to connect all the dots because you got to connect all these financial markets and so on. But that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here to tell you. And I've done some of this homework. I've looked at a lot of the videos, and please, in the comments, tell me what you think about Evergrande. Tell me what other videos you've seen and I should see, get my opinions on about what's going on with Evergrande or the other markets. I do look at Economic Ninja. I do look at Cliff High. I look at a lot of different people that put out a lot of videos across the different perspectives. But from everything I've seen from all those and more about what's going on with Evergrande, we are about to see a lot of mass exodus from the traditional markets over to the crypto space, which will lead to mass adoption, which will lead to large price appreciation in terms of dollar, which eventually we're going to have to get away from anyway. But for now, you're going to get a lot more purchasing power in your crypto market, because there's going to be a lot of money heading this way because they got to get out where it's currently at now. So a lot said today. I hope that it helped you to make sense of where we're at with Evergrande and the fact that we are at a tipping point and we are at a historic day, 80 years later. And no one's going to announce it to you, but here I am to say it, that this could very well be the tipping point where we are about to have mass adoption of cryptocurrency. So with all that said, I'll close the door on the bureau. I'll see you next time. Take care.